Hey everyone, welcome to Founders 365 with me, Stephen Haggerty. Today I'm joined by the co-founder and CEO of OLIO, Miss Tessa Clarke. How are you today, Tessa?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good indeed. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate
No
it.
worries.
And let's make this really nice and snappy into it. And I guess the best way to do that is for you just to give an overview of what OLIO is, what you guys do, the mission and everything in between.
Okie dokie. So OLIO is an app that exists to tackle the problem of waste in the home. And we do that by connecting people with their neighbours so that you can give away rather than throw away your spare food and other household items. Was that
Nice and
snappy
easy.
enough?
Oh, I mean, probably maybe the most snappiest one I've had yet. So I feel like you've just been practicing that, or you just say it so often.
It's a fast elevator I go in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the fastest elevator. So let's rewind then. What was going on in your world when this idea came about? What was happening? What was that moment that you thought, I can create something that is going to tackle this problem?
Okay, right. So winding back almost 6 years now into the dim distant past, I think it's fair to say I had what could be described as a fairly classic corporate career. And this time 6 years ago, I was feeling increasingly frustrated because I was going to events, listening to people talking. I was super inspired by all the stories I was hearing from the stage, and I'd reflect on my life and what I'd achieved and was just feeling profoundly uninspired. And I was just kind of getting sick and tired of being uninspired by myself. So I was definitely in the mindset where I wanted to do something entrepreneurial and I wanted to do something that was definitely kind of positive for the world. The Lightbulb moment, if you like, took place in a sort of, seemingly random, actually, moment in my life. So I was living in Switzerland, moving back to the UK. And on moving day, the packing men said that I had to throw away all of our food. Now, I'm a farmer's daughter. I hate food waste. I've got a pathological hatred for it. So I wasn't prepared to do that, much to the irritation of the packing guys. Instead, I sort of stopped packing, bundled up my newborn baby and toddler at the time, and this food, and I set out into the streets to try and find someone to give it to. Failed miserably. Thought about knocking on my neighbours' doors and just thought I didn't have the time for that and it'd be awkward and embarrassing. So when the removal men weren't looking, I smuggled the non-perishable food into the bottom of my packing boxes. And that was the moment when I just thought, this is ridiculous. The length I'm going to not have to throw away food. I've been in digital for 15 years at that point. I knew there's an app for everything. And I couldn't believe there wasn't an app where I could just advertise this food to my neighbours and whoever wanted it would pop round and pick it up.
Exactly.
And now there is.
And now there is, thanks to your removal guys being
Yeah.
strangely stubborn about not having food in the truck.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to start with. So you thought, like you said, you looked around, there wasn't a service being able to offer this. How was the process from the idea of going, maybe I can do this, to, I guess, to that point where it was a tangible service, a tangible product that people were using? What was that timeline like?
So there were quite a few steps in that process. So I had that experience in December 2014 with the removal guys. And I quite loved this idea of an app that connected neighbours to share food. I told a few people about it and they thought I had gone barking mad. They thought that perhaps I need to get off maternity leave. Maybe I got too much baby brain. I need to kind of get back to work. But it was in February of 2015, so a couple of months later, I shared the idea with my now co-founder, Saasha. We did our MBAs together at Stanford about 15 years ago now. And I told her about this idea of a neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app. She immediately got it. Her eyes lit up. We did sort of a 1-hour mini MBA on it. And by the end of that hour, we were both in. And so that, for me, was absolutely critical. I don't think, if I'm being really honest, I would have had the courage to start a startup or become an entrepreneur, which sounds terribly grandiose, if I'd done it by myself. But there's sort of safety in numbers. So the two of us decided that this was a problem that needs to be solved and we were going to solve it. So the first thing we did was desk research, and what we discovered blew our brains. We couldn't believe that everyone wasn't screaming from the rooftops about the fact that globally a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away, which is worth over $1 trillion US. Alongside that, we've got 800 million people who go to bed hungry every night, who could be fed on a quarter of the food that we waste in the Western world. And then, as if that weren't bad enough, food waste is absolutely devastating for the environment. If it were to be a country, it'd be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And then we discovered that half of all food waste in a country like the UK takes place in the home. So that means we're half that problem, but actually through Olio, that means that we can be half the solution. So we did that desk research, which definitely gave us the conviction and the sort of fire in our belly to solve this problem. The second thing we then did was some market research to find out if anyone even cared about food waste. And what we found was that 1 in 3 people told us they were physically pained throwing away good food. So that was great. But then the third thing we did before building the app was to try and come up with some sort of proof of concept to prove out that hypothesis we had, which was that strangers would share food with one another. And we did that using WhatsApp. So we invited 12 people who didn't know each other, but who lived close to each other, onto a WhatsApp group for 2 weeks. And we said, here's a group of people. If you've got any spare food, you can share it here. And through that sort of 2 weeks, we saw lots of sharing take place. We met with those people afterwards and they said, you have to build it. It only needs to be slightly better than a WhatsApp group. And how can I help? And so with that, we thought, right, we're now prepared to put our life savings behind this and build an app. And it took us 5 months to the day from sort of starting this process, incorporating the company, to getting the app in the App Store.
Wow. That's a quick turnaround as well.
It was extremely fast. We're both the breadwinners in our family. We were both on maternity leave and knew that if we didn't sort of prove out what we were doing by the end of that year, then we'd have to go back and get proper jobs again. And we did not want to do it. No. So we were massively on a mission.
Yeah.
And, so things like logo and branding, I think it was, 150 quid through Fiverr or something like that.
Why not? Sometimes
job
that's
done,
all it takes.
Yeah, exactly. We realized that this idea wasn't going to live or die, certainly not in the early days, by our logo or our branding. So
definitely. I'm curious to get the conversation going about your obviously relationship with Saasha. You've known her for a long time.
Yeah.
What are your strengths and weaknesses with each other? Because bringing on a co-founder or working, you often see solo founders, you often see 2, 3 co-founders, and the relationship between them all is always very different and very unique. So with you and Saasha, what are her strengths? What are your strengths? And how do you both combine together to basically effectively create the powerhouse that you've created with Olio?
So my relationship with Saasha is amazing, and vice versa. We absolutely adore each other. We complement each other really well. We're best of friends and we work extremely well together. And I think our relationship actually is one of the core strengths of Olio, because we do complement each other well. And on day one, the day we incorporated the company, we also sat down and divvied out the roles and the functions. And we thought, do you know what, now is not the time for us each to sort of have a go at doing something we've always wanted to do. We need to play to our respective strengths. And so I took the sort of strategy, product, PR. I also do customer support. Saasha, so I'm kind of the CEO, I guess the more outward facing role. And then Saasha is the COO. And so she takes all of marketing, managing our network of retailers and also volunteers. And then she's our CFO, our HR director, our legal director.
Everything else in between.
Everything else, yes. And it works incredibly well. We're both also, I think it's fair to say, fairly conflict averse. And so what we do is, anytime we've got kind of any more than, let's say, 5% discontent between us, we kind of release that pressure valve, and we'll always just talk to each other about it and just kind of just let off the steam little and often. And we've found that's a really, really productive way of working. We also work remotely, and we've found that a really powerful way of working too, because we don't have too much group think. And so it's kind of really reassuring if you've been looking at some data in the business or thinking about something, and then you come together and realize that independently you've both come to the same conclusion. It gives you a lot more conviction that sort of what you're doing is the right thing. Definitely.
Do you remember that moment? You launch on the App Store within the 5 months, or just at that 5 month mark. Do you remember the moment when you were seeing the data and people were downloading the app? How did that feel for you both, to be able to obviously see that moment?
I remember launching into the App Store, because the day we were doing this was their big day. We'd been sort of,
you had the balloons pumped up ready.
No, my husband decided not to tell me. He was kind of renovating our house at the time, and decided not to tell me that he cut off the electrics.
It just slipped his mind that this
I
project that
know.
you've been talking about for the last 5 months.
I know. So there was a few tense exchanges of words. Managed to get back online again. So I definitely vividly remember that day. I also really vividly remember, so what we'd done, we're building a marketplace, and we knew that we needed to seed supply. So there needs to be food on the app when people arrived. And so we'd asked those 12 people that I told you about on the WhatsApp group who said they wanted to help. We said, well, actually, you can clear out all your cupboards to day of launch. That would be fantastic. But I can remember, so they were sort of our friendlies, they were our ambassadors. And I can remember the first sort of listing that came onto the app was a homegrown lettuce from a guy called Adam. And that was just a moment of, wow, this is real. And someone requested it and they picked it up. And that was magic. And it took us a couple of weeks, actually. We had, our first shares were sort of ambassador to ambassador. Then we had ambassador to stranger. And then we had our first ever sort of stranger to stranger share. And that was really, really magical.
It's those moments, I think, in any business where you'll always look back at, and it's like that huge achievement moment where you can look at each other, look at your co-founder, and just like smile and nod, like, yeah, we've done this, we created this. What's the biggest challenge with OLIO then? Because like you said, you created this marketplace, and I guess it's changed over the years in terms of, because you guys got very popular, and that helps with the supply and demand aspect side of it. But what's some of the challenges that you face now today with just getting the value out there, getting that core story, and I guess making those steps towards your mission?
So I'll give you two challenges. So one challenge does relate to the marketplace dynamics. And so we found very, very quickly that suppliers are constrained. So funnily enough, there is no shortage of people who want to pop out of their house and go pick up some free food. We also have non-food now as well. And so half of all the food listings added to the app are requested within 25 minutes.
Wow.
So our challenge is just encouraging more and more people to take that leap of faith, which we acknowledge that it is, to go into your cupboards and drawers and to believe that someone might want it. So we're constantly trying to encourage people to do that. We're thinking very deeply about behavior change, behavioral psychology, and all that kind of stuff. And that's just part of our ongoing quest, is to get more supply onto the platform. And that was also what led us to create our Food Waste Heroes program, where we now have 10,000 volunteers who collect unsold food from local businesses. They take it home, they add it to the app, the neighbours request it, the neighbours pop round. So kind of supply is always a top of mind challenge for us. And then this, I guess, the more sort of founder psychology challenge is, I think sort of in the early days, we had this fantasy that there was this enormous problem out there. We just had to put our app into the world and everybody would see what a marvelous, efficient solution to this existential problem for humanity it was, and that we would have Instagram style growth.
Yeah.
And
Nobel Prize,
unfortunately,
here we come.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, that has not happened. And I think we spent the first sort of 2 or 3 years believing every sort of product release, every marketing initiative was a silver bullet. This was going to be the one. And we've realized that actually there is no silver bullet. There's just a shit ton of lead bullets just pounding away at it. And sort of collectively they build up to something.
On that note then, what keeps your motivation? Is it that core problem that you want to solve that makes you turn up every day and sort of relentlessly grow this business?
Without a doubt, yes, it is. So
if you said no, I would be very worried.
Exactly. No, it is an amazing experience, actually. I've always been the type of person who's passionate about whatever I do, but it's night and day working on something that every single day you need, that the world needs you to do what you're doing. And every time I read something about the climate crisis, which is basically on a daily basis, it terrifies me. And I know that if humanity stand any chance whatsoever of mitigating the worst effects of the climate crisis, we've got to solve the problem of food waste, and specifically in the home. The other thing that's really motivating, there are two things, I guess. So that's, I guess, more of an intellectual motivation. It's then very visceral motivation, feeling a bit blue. I can kind of go onto the back end admin system and just see all this food being saved. And then the third thing is, I did customer support 24/7 for the first sort of 3 or 4 years of OLIO, and some of the emails we received from our users literally kind of brought tears to my eyes and made me cry. And again, that's just incredibly motivating, knowing that you're making a real difference to people's lives.
Definitely. I mean, you must have the app itself, and you guys as a team must have inspired countless people, untangible amount of people to do things that perhaps they never thought they would, in the sense of such a simple concept of just sharing
Yeah.
food with your neighbour, which is, I absolutely love simple concepts done really well, and this is a key example of it. So if you're inspiring all these people, who inspires you guys, not on a motivation level, but in that inspiration side?
Gosh, who inspires me? I think that's a
big question.
It is a big question. And the real answer is I get inspiration from all over. So I'm an obsessive podcast listener, for example. So every single day I walk, run, or cycle listening to podcasts, and I get inspiration from what I'm listening to. I read lots of books. So I don't think there's sort of a single person necessarily that inspires me. I get inspiration from my team, from our users, and especially actually sort of from our users. And back to the point you made about us having an impact that we can't even know about, that's something that's really, really amazing. Is sometimes we'll kind of stumble across something that's happened in our community. So for example, we've had 2 examples now of our users getting together to create a community garden, and there's another group of users who've got together to form a company to sell jam made from surplus food they've been picking up via the app. And people have made sort of friendships and this, that, and the other. And it's really inspiring hearing all those stories and all those kind of doorstep connections and all the initiative that everybody's showing, just when you give them an opportunity to connect with their neighbours.
Did you ever think that back in Switzerland, when your removal company was saying that you can't put your fruit and veg on the van, that we would be here today, where you've had incredible achievements such as that? When you thought about that entrepreneurial itch that you wanted to scratch, did you think it would evolve into this?
Sort of yes and no. So half of me had massive imposter syndrome, and it just felt like a bit of a joke, especially in the first year, where people would ask you, what do you do? And I kind of couldn't quite bring myself to say the E word, the entrepreneur, because I'm like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I haven't actually created anything. It's not actually making a difference. So I found that really, really, and I had no clue what we were doing. So I found that really, really difficult. So on the one hand, with that sort of imposter syndrome hat on, I find it amazing what we've achieved today. But then if I'm being really honest, there was another half of me which always said, if I'm going to do something, it needs to be able to have impact and scale at the same level of Facebook. And so our sort of stated ambition for Olio is we want 1 billion Olioers within the next 10 years.
Incredible.
And, that's because that's what we have to achieve to mitigate the worst effects of the climate crisis. So I'm sort of constantly slightly sort of schizophrenic in terms of how I feel about it.
How do you combat that imposter syndrome? Because that's an incredibly big goal. And when that's achieved, that's an incredible moment. But how do you overcome those imposter syndrome moments to ensure that actually happens?
Well, I think the key thing with imposter syndrome is to recognize that spending more than 5 seconds thinking about it is just wasting your time, because it's honestly not going to achieve anything. All it's doing is distracting you from your goal. So I tend to just kind of acknowledge it and then just try and move on and just do something. Just take that first step, whatever it is. And everything is just sort of one baby step after the other, right? And if you just keep on walking, you'll go a long way, but you just got to start.
And that's the key, isn't it? Action always works over anything.
It's
and distracting the mind.
Exactly. And actually, and if you just break it all down, then each step is a really small incremental step, but it's only if you just keep doing that day after day after day after day after day, that's when it starts to compound and really grow and make a difference.
Yeah.
But, we've still got so far to go. We spend probably 0.5% of our time thinking, yay, what we've achieved. And we spend the other 99.5% of our time thinking, oh my God, we're running out of time. We have so much more to do.
But that 0.5% is so important for that, 99.5% side of things, because they have to, like you said earlier, you have to have that inspiration to remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing. What's next for you guys, in the sense of sort of a two-parted question here, in terms of how has 2020, this little blip in our timeline of life at the moment, how has that, guys, impacted you? Has it gone sort of because from a consumer point of view, it's interesting to look at that, because you think, well, would people go back to almost that being afraid and having that caution side, or actually would they go the opposite side, which we've seen so many people do in communities, and actually open their doors and obviously be super giving? And what have you seen in terms of the app usage on that side? And then on the flip side to that question is, what's next in terms of 2021?
So I'll take the first one. So you're absolutely right. At the start of COVID, it was a coin toss, right, as to whether people would go, oh, there's this horrific disease shared between people in proximity to one another. We all need to retrench to our homes, or people would reach out and support each other. And who knew which way it was going to go? So for the first 24 hours of when lockdown was announced, it was extremely unclear that a neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app could continue to exist. But we worked really, Saasha and I were determined to make sure that OLIO kept operating. And so we worked very closely with our food safety lawyer, our environmental health officer, and also listened to our community. And they told us loud and clear, they said, you have a responsibility to stay operating, because actually you are, for many of us, arguably a safer source of food than getting on public transport or going into stores, etc. So we quickly switched the model to be a no contact pickup, which meant that it was COVID compliant. And what we saw, the first sort of week or so, we had about a drop off of 20-25%. And then from early April onwards, we saw that wonderful hockey stick growth. And we grew more in the first 5 weeks of lockdown than we did in the previous 5 years.
Incredible. Wow.
And that's exactly as you were saying, because people were wanting to support their local communities. People were also had the time. They were kind of stuck at home and wanting to do more than staying home to help. I think we also had a great awareness of just how many people were suffering and struggling. There was plenty of, thankfully, media headlines alerting everyone to the fact that, for example, 1.5 million people were going hungry every day. And I think that helped. But broadly, I think sort of coming out of COVID, two sort of mega trends are that desire to connect more with our local community. And I think also because we're living with our local community so much more. And then secondly, whilst COVID did seem to derail the sustainability movement and concerns around the climate crisis, I do actually think that a lot of people have had time to reflect on it. And net, we're sort of coming back stronger, recognizing that the status quo can be challenged, and therefore we should.
Some of the stories you've heard about people sort of changing their lives and doing amazing things is incredible. And I guess it's one of those moments in time which is kind of like what your maternity moment was, but just without the depressing headlines of it is that now or never moment for a lot of people. And I've interviewed some incredible people that have set up some amazingly community-led businesses on the back end of the COVID situation, which is so great to hear. So what's next for you guys? What's next for OLIO 2021? How far off are we about achieving the big goal?
Well, we've got a long way to go. So 2021 for us is about a couple of things. So one, we're continuing to build out the core product proposition of OLIO. So just very recently, in addition to connecting neighbours to give away food and other household items, we've launched a new section of the app called Made that connects neighbours to sell homemade food and handmade crafts to each other. And in Q1 of next year, we'll be also allowing our users to borrow items, which we think will be fantastic. So there's some product developments that need to be done. And also we're going to start monetizing on the C2C side through a freemium model. Second thing we're doing is continuing to scale our Food Waste Heroes programs. We're rolling out across all of Tesco's 2,700 stores, and we'll be continuing to sell into other large clients. And then the third thing really is getting ready for our Series B raise, which we're planning to go to market for in January 2022.
You got a very exciting year ahead of you then, basically.
We have a lot to do.
I've got two more questions for you, Tessa.
Go for it.
And the first one is, what have you got one of those pinch me moments, if you look back on your time since you founded to now, that you mind sharing and just experiencing that?
Well, I've got two actually.
You've always got two. Your answer
sorry.
It's great. I love it.
I've got two. Well, the first one was when we won a United Nations award. We were highlighted. I think 13 organizations from around the world were selected as beacons for the world in terms of solving the climate crisis. And we were all selected because we were doing something that was really scalable and could actually solve the climate crisis. So that was amazing. And then I had another one just on Friday night. I was invited onto Newsnight to discuss the government's recent 10-point plan for their green industrial revolution, and was asked my views on that. And that was definitely a pinch me moment too. Terrifying.
But both probably terrifying in different ways, but both also very, I mean, incredible to be noticed and sort of put on that platform by the United Nations, which is such a great achievement.
Exactly.
And Newsnight just as great. It's you've got to have that picture of yourself on the TV. Everyone needs it.
Pinned to the top of Twitter for the next 5 years.
Just with a note next to it for your husband. Remember the launch day. That's it. And Tessa, I guess my final question is for people that haven't already got OLIO or haven't experienced it, what is the best way for them to do that? What's the best way for them to get involved?
So immediately go to the App Store or Google Play. It's OLIO, spelled OLIO, or you can search for us online, and we're on social media as @olio.app.
Fantastic. Tessa, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. I've loved it, and I cannot wait just to see you guys do more and more good in the world. And thank you for being here. Thanks to your removal company, should we say, for not allowing you fruit and veg on the van.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Cool. Take care.
Thanks everyone else for listening and watching. This has been Founders 365.